Alright guys, so this is the solution for Isogram. As usual, what we need to do is start with the README file, which I have opened here at the bottom. Isogram. Determine if a word or phrase is an isogram. An isogram, also known as a non-pattern word, is a word or phrase without repeating letters. However, spaces and hyphens are allowed to appear multiple times. So here are some examples of isograms. We have lumberjacks, background, downstream, 6-year-old. Notice that with 6-year-old, there are hyphens, but this is still an isogram because hyphens aren't counted when you're checking to see whether or not something is an isogram. The word isograms, however, is not an isogram because the S repeats. And that's pretty much it. There's a note at the bottom about testing that is at the bottom of all these README files. Alright, so we have that we just need to return whether or not something is or is not. Either two states. So if you guys know, if you have two states, what's being referred to here is binary, right? Two states, is or is not, true or false, 0 or 1, right? So, and you even get a hint here in the stub for the files that are provided to you. So, the stub that you need to edit is pointing to bool, which basically is saying that what you need to return is a bool, a true or false. So you're going to check to see whether or not the word or the string that's sent in is an isogram. If it is, you return true. If it is not, you return false. Okay? So what we can do before we even start writing any code is run the test script to see what we get. Okay? This test script has 13 tests. Of course, all of them failed right now because we haven't made any changes. So you can see some of these tests. This last one here, this should have returned false because what the test script sent over was ZZYZX. You can see multiple repeated letters there, so we should return false. So again, here, while running the test script, we can see what the test script is expecting. It's expecting either a true or false, depending on what is sent over. We have alphabet, and we're supposed to return false, even though there is a capital and a lowercase letter here. Okay, scrolling up and trying to see if there are any other ones. Okay, this one says Emily Jung Schmorthoff. This one is an isogram because there are no repeating letters, even though there's some spaces. So this test script is expecting us to return true. All right, so let's get to work. It seems fairly straightforward. You guys need to employ a couple things here. But first, what we need to do is to keep track of all the letters that we have seen. And if we see the letter again, then we know that it's not an isogram. And a good way to keep track of something like that is inside of a list. So we can create a list at the beginning of our function called seen. And we can create an empty list because we haven't seen anything yet. And you guys know that you can create empty lists with just brackets like this. Okay? Then, just like we have with other problems, we need to look at each letter in the string that's being sent to us. This is the string parameter, and when it's sent over to us, we need to look at each letter in that string. And the best way to do that, as you guys have learned from previous problems and also in session, is to use a for loop. So we can say for letter in string, and that'll let us look at every letter in the string. Okay? What we need to do is check to see if the letter in the string has been seen. Okay? The first time we start this loop, no letter in the string is going to be seen, but we need to check that before we add to the letter. Because if we do it, we check it after we add to our seen list, we might miss a letter. So right here, we have to check if letter is in seen. And I showed you guys how to do the in as well. So if you guys have forgotten that, I can jump over to REPL and show you. Okay, so if we open up REPL and I say create a string with the name Beyonce, and we say is BEY in string, we're going to get a false. Because while BEY is in Beyonce, capital B, E, and Y is not. But if we say if B is in the string, we will get a true because the capital B is in there, okay? So we can use that same logic inside of our program. So if we jump back over to Thony and say if the letter that we're looking at is inside of our seen list, we are going to return false. Because if it's in the seen list, then we've seen the letter already and we know isograms can't have repeated letters, okay? So we're going to return false, all right? If the F statement is skipped, if the letter is not in seen, then this whole block is skipped. These two blocks are skipped. In that case, what we want to do is add the letter to our seen list so that the next time we go around the loop, we can catch it if it is in our seen list. So we want to say scene.append, and then you guys have learned how to add things to a list, and we just want to add the letter to the list. So next time, if we see this letter, whatever the letter is inside of this variable, if we see the letter in the seen list, then we'll return false. Okay? So if this loop goes all the way through and nothing is seen, then we can return true because we know that we've looked at every single letter because we use this loop to look at every single letter in the string that was sent over, and we never got this to say that the letter was in the seen list, and we keep adding to the seen list, and we got through the entire loop and it never returned false. Since it never returned false, we can assume if it's gotten through the entire loop that we can return true. Alright, so this is a good start. We might see that this doesn't solve a problem, but it's a good start to a problem. So if we run the test now, let's see what we get. Okay, we ran 13 tests and only 4 failures. That's a lot better than we had before. We had 13 tests. We've solved a lot of our problems. So what I'm going to do is actually run the test in the terminal so we can take a look at what is failing now. Okay? All right, so let's open up the terminal. I'm going to make the text a little bit larger, and we're going to cd to where the files are. So for me, it's in challenges and then isogram. Okay. All right, so I'm going to use PyTest here. I'm going to say PyTest v, and then we're going to say isogram test. Okay. Okay, so a little bit smaller so we can see what's happening. All right, 4 tests have failed. You can see what passed. So a bunch of things passed at the top here. We passed several of these things, and we can see that the tests that are failing, we can see the first thing that is failing is the thing that has duplicate hyphens. So it sent us duplicate hyphens, and we're not supposed to say that that is not an isogram, and apparently we did say it's not an isogram because of the duplicates. The next thing that has failed is made up name that is an isogram, okay? So that we're supposed to return true there. The next thing that failed is duplicate characters in mixed case. So mixed case meaning that they sent us uppercase and lowercase and we didn't handle that properly, okay? And then duplicate characters in mixed case and lowercase, okay? So they sent us a couple things. We can actually go down and see here. So we were supposed to return true for here. Remember from the README file, we were supposed to say 6-year-old is an isogram. In our script as it's written right now, says that we sent a false. Okay, it says false is not true because false is not true. It was supposed to be true. Okay, so we need to fix our script so that it returns true for things like this with dashes in it, even though the dashes or the hyphens show up more than once. Okay, the next one here, we're supposed to return true for this. We were supposed to return true. We're supposed to return false for this, and I guess we did not because we saw the A at first, and then we saw another A, but we're not accounting for the fact that these A's are exactly the same, even though one is uppercase and one is lowercase. Because the computer knows that these are 2 different things. An uppercase A is not a lowercase a, but we're not talking about a computer task here. We're talking about an English task, and the English task that this program is trying to solve is whether or not something is an isogram. And when we're talking about English and we're not talking about programming, an uppercase A and a lowercase a isn't necessarily that different. When we're just trying to see whether or not the letters repeat. In this case, the letters do repeat, so we should have returned false, and we returned true. And then the 4th one is kind of the same thing. We have an uppercase A and a lowercase a, and we were supposed to return false. All right, so let's try to solve these problems one at a time, okay? Let's try to solve the issue with the uppercase and lowercase. And now you can do a web search for this to see how to check whether or not something is lowercase or uppercase in Python, but you can also just jump over to the cheat sheets. So if you click on the shortest cheat sheet, that's just 1 page, there are some answers in here already. So if we do a search in here for the word lower or upper, we already have a little bit of information here. We can convert to uppercase, and we can also convert to lowercase by using the name of the string in .upper or the name of the string in .lower. You can see here, it says here on this page, and this is just a 1-page cheat sheet. We can jump over to the next cheat sheet, which is a little bit longer, but has some similar information in it. So we can do a search for upper, and we can see, search for upper, there's a box here that explains all the string operations, or not all of them, but many of them. You can see here again, they're showing you that you can change something to uppercase or lowercase. There's also title. So this is very useful to help us solve our issue with those 2 tests that are failing. And then we can go to the longest cheat sheet and see if we can find even more information. Okay, so let's search for .lower again. Okay, and it gives you an example here. So you get car is equal to Audi. If you use .lower, it will change it to lowercase Audi because it's checking to see whether or not car.lower is equal to Audi with no capital A, and that comes out as true because that's what the .lower does. So I think with that information, we can make a few modifications to our script to help pass a few more tests. So let's jump back over to Thony, and let's, instead of saying string, let's make all the strings that we are sent over lowercase. Now we could create another variable saying, I don't know, lower equals string dot lower, and then replace string with lower. But as I told you guys, you should really not create variables if you don't need them. There's no reason to actually create a variable with all the letters from the string in lowercase when you can just use the lower here. So instead of recreating this variable, I'm going to undo that. Instead of creating an unnecessary variable, I'm just going to say right here, lower. So we'll get the lowercase of the entire string, regardless of what's sent in. And now when we get the lowercase of all the characters in the string, when we go through the loop, all the characters will be lowercase, and we'll be able to catch when something is uppercase or lowercase, because they'll all be lowercase when we're checking the letters. So if they're duplicate letters, it'll be added to our scene list. Okay, so let's save that, and let's go back to the terminal and run our test script again. Okay, now only 2 failed. So that solved our problem with the 2 tests that were failing with alphabet. Okay, so we have, let's see, duplicate characters in different case passed. So the alphabet and the alphabet. So now we only have 2 failures. Now, the last thing that we need to do is solve for the problem of duplicate characters that are not letters. So the two things that are failing now are because this 6-year-old has 2 dashes or 2 hyphens in it, and this name has 2 spaces in it. And we're, unfortunately, the way that our script is written right now, if any character is repeated, it's coming back as false. But we want to ignore spaces, and we want to ignore dashes, and we want to ignore anything that's not a letter or not part of the alphabet. Okay? Now, again, you could do a Google search, and this is a perfectly good way to solve this, to check whether or not a string is part of the alphabet. Or you can just jump over to one of the cheat sheets. And if we use one of the cheat sheets here, if you look through all the cheat sheets, you actually just saw this when we were looking for lower inside of that box. So if we check for lower again, so there's a bunch of things in here for string operations, but one of them is to check whether or not something is an alpha, part of the alphabet. Okay, so you can check whether or not your string is part of the alphabet. So we can use that information to modify our script to solve the problem altogether and fix those last 2 things that are failing. Okay, so let's go back over to Thony and use the is alpha in our script. So right now we're checking to see whether or not the letter is in scene, and then returning false. But we only really want to check whether or not the letter is in scene if it is an alpha, right? So what we want to do is check to see if it is an alpha, and check whether or not it's in scene. So what we can do is say if the letter is alpha and the letter is in scene. Okay, so this will return true or false whether or not it's in alpha, and this will check whether or not the letter has already been seen. Both of these things have to be true for us to return false, right? This has to be true, and this has to be true for us to return false. That's what the and means, okay? So it has to be an alpha character, has to be part of the alphabet, and it has to be inside of our scene list. If it's not in our scene list, then we haven't seen it, then we can skip this and go down and add the letter to our scene list. And if we get through the loop, just like before, we return true, okay? So now I'm gonna save this, and then I'm gonna run the test script inside of Thony and see what we get. Get ran 13 tests, everything is okay. Go over to the terminal and do the same thing. There we go. And we passed it. And that's it, guys. That's pretty much all you had to do.